For those who are unfamiliar with the term Al-Nakba, which is translated as catastrophe, it is a term used by the Palestinians to refer to the mass exodus of at least 750,000 Arabs from Palestine. Although most people believe that this event began in 1948, in fact, Al-Nakba began decades earlier because European Zionists came to Palestine decades before World War II took place. After all, the Balfour Declaration was in 1917, when the British, without consulting the Palestinians, decided to give Palestine to the Zionists. The Zionists then, with the help of the British military, started the process of dispossessing the Palestinians of their lands and properties, and in many cases, forced the Palestinians occupants out of their properties at gunpoint. Now there are millions of Palestinian refugees languishing in many refugee camps in the Middle East. There are also millions in Gaza and other parts of the world unable to return to their country. On the other hand, any person from any place in the world who can prove he or she has a Jewish ancestry can go to historic Palestine and become a citizen of Israel. They are even encouraged to stay in the settlements in the West Bank on lands that will have been appropriated or seized from Palestinians, even though the international community do not recognize Israel's control over those lands. This settler colonialism project is still unfinished, as we are witnessing now the events taking place in Sheikh Jarrah district of Baitul Maqdis. In other words, Nakba is an ongoing thing, despite us now being in the 21st century. Human beings claim to now be living in a modern world, but ironically, they are allowing primitive practices of land grabbing, robberies, and murders to take place in Palestine. Because even as we are speaking now, more than 100 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza in recent days, including women and children, as a result of bombings by Israeli fighter jets supplied by the United States. To discuss the issue further today, we have with us 4 distinguished panelists. They are, first is Manal, who is the Advocacy and Campaigning Coordinator for the grassroots Palestinian Stop the War campaign in the West Bank. She is based in the West Bank, right? And then we have also Professor Saul Takahashi, who is a Professor of Human Rights and Peace Studies at Osaka Jogakuin University. He spent many years in Palestine from 2009 to 2014 as the Deputy Head of Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights in occupied Palestine. And our third panelist is Dr. Saad Akashah, who is a former professor, a researcher and expert in development from Kuwait, and also active with Kuwaitis for Jerusalem organization. And our fourth speaker is Mr. Olivier Bancoult, who is the leader of the Chagos Refugee Group, which has been at the helm of the struggle against British settler colonialism and for Chagossian self-determination. So we start with Manal. Can you explain or share with us the latest from Baitul Maqdis? I heard reports that some Palestinians have been killed have been murdered actually by the Israeli police or Israeli military while protesting against what's happening over there. So they seem to be very determined to really get rid of Palestinians from their homes in Sheikh Jarrah. And they don't really care what the international community is saying about what's happening, right? So can you please share with us what is the latest over there? Manal, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to speak in this event. I want to start by mourning more than 20 Palestinians whom we lost to Israeli violence yesterday, either in the Gaza Strip or in the West Bank, and a Lebanese protester who joined in solidarity by marching towards the borders with Israel. Although we are going through really difficult situation, Our hearts are encumbered with sorrow for the loss of hundreds of Palestinians since the last couple of days, especially in the Gaza Strip, and the many others who have been injured and others who are arrested. But we continue the uprising up until now, despite the Israeli use of tremendous violence. And I think that we in Palestine have entered a new stage in our struggle for liberation and decolonization. We all over historic Palestine are now united around one main goal, which is to fight back against our ongoing and recurring Nakba that has started in 1948. And these moments are really important moments of our uprising and in our anti-colonial struggle, because we are now disrupting Israeli plans to obliterate our existence, to obliterate the Palestinian identity all over Palestine since more than 7 decades. And what is happening in 48 Palestine, which is present-day Israel, is a perfect example of that. Since more than 70 years, Israel has been trying through a campaign that is called the Israelization of the Palestinians who remained in Palestine when during the mass ethnic cleansing of 2/3 of the Palestinian people when Israel was created in 1948. These programs of Israelization are meant to erase the Palestinian identity of these people through different ways, talking about the education system that is totally controlled by the Israeli authorities, that teaches Palestinians there to accept their constructed inferiority to their colonizers, and teaches them to be thankful that the Jewish Zionist state of Israel has been created on the ruins of their people's lands. These people are denied the right to practice their cultural traditions. Israel, since years, has been spreading drugs and weapons among them in order to create STEM generations who are unable to develop their society and to demand their rights, which they are denied. And adding to this, Palestinians in 48 Palestine have been since decades isolated from the rest of their people in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip. But now, since more than a week, we see them every day taking to the streets, raising the flag of Palestine and expressing solidarity and even unity with the rest of the Palestinian people in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, and in the Gaza Strip. This also applies to the situation of Palestinians in Jerusalem. Israel has also set programs to disconnect the Palestinian society in Jerusalem from the rest of the Palestinian people and disconnect them from their Palestinian identity. And in addition to this, Israel systematically uses violence against them to suppress them and to deprive them of the spirit to resist the oppression that they are subject to. Just to give you an example of this oppression, every year the Israeli occupation authorities arrest 1,000 children only from Jerusalem. And these children, they encounter torture for weeks. The torture sometimes lasts for 2 weeks or even more, and after that many of them they spend months or years in Israeli jails. And when they leave the jail, Israeli soldiers keep regularly raiding their houses, inspecting them in the middle of the night and chasing them on the way to school. But despite of all of that, we see them leading. I'm going to say leading because they are the true leaders now. They are leading protests and organizing protests all over Jerusalem in order to disrupt a scheme after another to obliterate their existence in their city and to tighten the grip over their city and religious sites. During the month of Ramadan, the protesters in Jerusalem succeeded in removing the iron barriers set by the Israeli occupation to prevent them from the gathering at Damascus Gate, which is called in Arabic Bab al-Amud, and also to restrict their access to the old city of Jerusalem and Al-Aqsa Mosque. They also succeeded in enforcing the Israeli Supreme Court to to postpone issuing a decision that would ethnically cleanse 6 families from the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah. Also, during the month of Ramadan, Israel had a scheme to control Al-Aqsa Mosque, to impose facts on the ground embodied in making a fact or enforcing Palestinians to accept the presence of Israeli settlers. So it is to spatially divide Al-Aqsa compound, as they did with the Ibrahimi Mosque in Hebron. But because Israel didn't choose the month of Ramadan randomly to do so, it was planned very well, because Palestinians during the month of Ramadan are connected more to Al-Aqsa Mosque. So Israel tried to give us, not only in Jerusalem but all over Palestine, to give us a painful blow to our right to Al-Aqsa Mosque, but this attempt failed due to the resistance of Palestinians in Jerusalem. And the same also applies to what is happening here in the rest of the West Bank. Despite Israeli oppression before the uprising and now during the uprising, Palestinians continue to protest. Yesterday, Palestinians protested in more than 150 areas, more than 1,000, and 700 were injured only in the West Bank. 11 people died. They were shot by the Israeli occupation forces. And now, right now, while I'm talking, they don't want to give up on protesting. They are organizing protests to mark Nakba Day and to confront Israeli soldiers wherever they are at checkpoints. Moreover, as part of disrupting Israeli plans is how we saw Palestinian refugees joined, of course, by Jordanian and Lebanese protesters march towards, in thousands, march towards the borders of Palestine yesterday. This is in itself a way, in this way, we see Israeli plans collapsing, because Israel was betting on the passing of time for Palestinian refugees who were forced out of Palestine to forget that they have a right and the connection to their homeland. And I think that this moment, or these moments that we witness, the moments of resistance and uprising, are the moments where we see more cracks in Israel's visible and invisible walls. These cracks are our longing for freedom, for justice, and self-determination. All are rights that Israel has been denying us since decades. And the intensification of violence against us that we witness, especially in Gaza, is an Israeli attempt to fix these cracks in its walls. But I'm going to say here that it's going to fail, because fixing these cracks is beyond fixation. Because the more we are oppressed, the more we are determined to continue the uprising, the more we are determined to continue the struggle in order to dismantle Israeli apartheid and liberate our country. I also think that the uprising is an important moment in our anti-colonial struggle, because now we are trampling on all the efforts to liquidate our just cause, mainly the deal of the century, including the normalization deals between some oppressive Arab regimes and Israel's. I mean, we've been portrayed by these regimes as passive victims, or as people who don't have connection to their land or to their identity. In the mainstream media of these normalizing countries, we've been even portrayed as traitors who gave up on the right to their land. They also thought that we are leaderless, and because we are leaderless, we are not protected. They thought that they can do whatever they want to trample on our rights. But now we are filled with pride and with dignity, proving to ourselves and to the world that we are not leaderless. The fact that we have the Palestinian Authority that is collaborating with the occupation because it was founded by the Israeli occupation to serve its interests does not mean that we are leaderless or that we are powerless. We are powerful. And the true leaders now are the protesters in the rallying in the streets, the protesters who are demanding their rights and demanding an end to Israeli oppression, and who are trying to right in the wrongs and the injustice that have been done to us since decades through what is called our ongoing and our recurring Nakba. Last but not least, I want to talk about the importance and the urgency of solidarity with us right now. Solidarity efforts with us should increase in order to de-escalate Israeli violence, especially in the Gaza Strip. But I'm going to emphasize that de-escalating this violence won't put an end to Israeli apartheid practices. Israeli apartheid regime will continue to be in place. Palestinians languishing in millions in refugee camps will continue to be denied the right to return. We will continue to be oppressed by the Israeli military occupation here in the West Bank. Gaza will continue to be blockaded inhumanly by Israeli apartheid. So we should think of or start working on a long-term solidarity plans that is embodied in pressuring the UN or working towards recognizing for the UN to recognize Israel as an apartheid state. We've been Palestinians calling for that since decades, but now for anyone who has doubt that Israel has been practicing apartheid against us, I think that it's crystal clear right now that Israel is an apartheid state, especially regarding what is happening now in 48 Palestine. It is also important to support the BDS more and more, and support the investigation of Israel, of the ICC investigation of apartheid. That is taking place right now. It is also important not only for the UN to recognize Israel as an apartheid regime, but also to reactivate the mechanisms of apartheid in order to dismantle this oppressive system, mainly by imposing military embargo on Israel, by cutting any business relations with Israeli settlements. I'm going to stop here. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Manal. I'll get back to you after it to get some more comments from you. But in the meantime, I'll get some comments from Olivier, because I know Olivier needs to go back. He doesn't have much time to spend with us, so I'm going to ask Olivier to give some comments. Olivier is being a Chagos refugee, a victim of British colonialism. This situation in Palestine may not be a surprise to you. I suppose some people may not be familiar with what has happened to the Chagos people, how they were forcibly forced out of their own country and not allowed to return back by Britain. Maybe you can. There's some parallel. Can you explain to us how the parallel is what the British did to your people, as well as what the British did to the Palestinians and what the Zionists are doing to the Palestinians? Go ahead. Olivier, go ahead. Floor yours.
First of all, thank you all to give me this opportunity to address in the webinar. And first of all, I have to say that we are very supportive to our brothers and sisters of Palestine, because Palestinian and Chagossian our same struggle. We have been fighting for many years for our fundamental rights. As you said before, we as Chagossian were living in peace and harmony in our country, the main island archipelago, Chagos archipelago, where the main island is Jogakuin, where now we have a US military base. People having a very peaceful and harmony life. We have our tradition, we have our culture, and suddenly, because of the decision of UK and US, they decided to build a US military base on Chagossian. First of all, they asked people that they should leave Chagossian and move to other outer islands. I myself, I was born in Peros Banos, one of the highlands of Chagos Archipelago. And I left Chagos at the age of 4. And we had been dumped in the slum of Port Louis, like our other brothers and sisters. And like we have also our brothers and sisters who had been sent to Seychelles. The reason why, because the big and superpower want to have Chagossian for a military purpose. And they have never think about the situation of those people who are living in harmony and peace. They just want to have the place. And let me tell you that only 1/3 of Chagossian is being used for the US military base. That means that 2/3 is inoccupied. Apart from that, when we talk about Chagos Archipelagos, it's 65 islands. And the distance from Peros, Banos, and Solomon to Chagossian is more than 140 miles away. Even that, they want to have Chagossian. It was a shameful way that they displaced the Chagossian people. First of all, by starting killing our dogs and just frightening people that they have to leave the country. And it was not the wish of every Chagossian, because we have been living there for more than 5 generations. No one can just prevent us to enter our own country, as it's explained in the International Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that everyone has the right to live on this place. But in front of us, we have this big power, but it's never, we have never mind about that, because it's more important about our fundamental rights and our dignity, because it's so important for all human beings. We started to have problem with UK government, because why Mauritius is concerned, because we have the link between Mauritius and Chagos, because all the provision coming from Mauritius to Chagos. And once in 1965, when the DICA decided to have a meeting in the Lancaster House, they asked Mauritian politicians that they will take Chagos and they will give independence to Mauritius. And without consulting any Chagossian. That means that everything has been done on our back without consulting us. It's not a way of doing that. But we have been dumped in the slum of Port, as I said, our brothers and sisters in Seychelles, and we had very difficulty to integrate ourselves in Mauritian society, because life how it was in Chagos is very different in Mauritius, because in Chagos we all have our own house, we have our job, whereas in Mauritius it was difficult for us to find a job, because most of our people don't have a level of education, because education itself had been introduced in 1960s. It's not a reason why not people, even if you don't have a level of education, you have the right of all human beings. Arriving in Mauritius, women started struggling. This is why I'm always saying I'm very proud of Chagossian women, because that leads a struggle against the super and big power, to say that there is no place better than home, and they want to return back home because they feel better at home. And they did many hunger strike demonstrations to express their point of view to the world. Until when I myself, after all my studies, I've got the chance to get in contact with a British solicitors who said to me that Chagossian have a very strong case. And we go ahead. We go ahead in the case because the main point was it legal to introduce a law that called British Ordinance 1971 to prevent Chagossian who were born on Chagos to return, but especially US and UK soldiers can have access. We want to know if it is illegal or legal. We face this case, and the points of defense for the UK government was that we were not permanent inhabitants, we were contractual workers. That is not true, because we were, as I said, we had been living there for more than 5 generations. And at that time, we discovered all the documents who had been disqualified in the Public Record Office, where we saw how they treat Chagossian, to even say that we were Tarzan and men on Friday. We were not, we were like seagull. We don't have a special place, a permanent place. We just moving from one place to another. This was not true. And with all the evidence, we went to the British Royal Court of Justice to go ahead to say that we want to protest, to challenge the decision of the UK government. And we did it. The case was of my name, but on behalf of the Chagossian committee. It was the first test for us, and it was very successful. We have people like Cecil Kentridge, South African man, lawyers, who had been settled in UK for many years. We successfully achieved the case, and the judge's conclusion was that we were belongers. We have never stopped to that, because even that is the first judgment given against the British government in order to banish the decision that has been taken against Chagossian people. 2 years after, they came with a proposition to say that it will be very difficult for Chagossian to live on Chagos because of the highland will be submerged under the sea, and then we have a problem of water. But we ask, it's very silly to say that, because how could it be possible that island will be submerged under the sea, where the US had been a US military base in Jogakuin? We challenged that, and we won against. We won against because our point was very, very strong. And they came with a British Ordnance Council that banished the right to say that they did not respect the decision of the Royal Court of Justice, and they said that the law need to return as it was, that is, that Chagossian will not have access, only British and UK soldiers. We continue our struggle because we have never given up, because the most important is our rights. Even your big power, you should respect. And we can't understand how British government, who supposed to say everywhere that they are champion of human rights, what they did with Chagossian was the most shameful treatment that they gave toward Pitcairn, toward St. Helena, toward Falkland. It's only Chagossian because we don't have blue eyes or we don't have white skin. Otherwise, we have better treatment. This is why. But the most important for us is our rights, the right of our people. They came in 2010, introducing the largest marine protected area, to say that in the eyes of people that it's better to protect environment instead of letting people go home. You see, but we challenge it. We say we are not against the protection of an environment, but the most important, to do the protection of an environment, we need to have the participation of human beings, the local people, and with that, they continue to try to see how to do not to prevent us to return. They take a decision in 2015 to come with a second feasibility studies to see whether it is practical to let Chagossian return back to Chagos. That had been done by KPMG in London. The conclusion was very in our favor. The report, the consultant report, said that there is no legal barrier to prevent Chagossian to return, because we can make cohabitation. Because if there is people like Filipinos, Singaporeans, Sri Lankans, British, American can live on Jogakuin, why not? We as native, we as descendants, you know, with that point, they see that so that they are in a very difficult position. they came with a finance position to say that, okay, they will not encourage our people to return. They will give a support package in order to improve the condition of living of Chagossian in Mauritius, in Seychelles, and in UK. Let me tell you, brothers and sisters, up to now, nothing has been done. And they were thinking that it was easy for them to just turn our mind that we will accept money instead of our dignity and our fundamental rights. We just say that no. At that time, Mauritius wants to have its sovereignty. Mauritius is fighting because there is something unlawful that is being done. There is a violation of UN Charter by dismember a territory before its independence, and the shameful way of uprooting people from the mother place to another country. You see, Mauritius bring the issue with the support of the Chagossian. We got the opportunity to witness, to explain to the world how we have been suffering for so many years by British government with the complicity of US government. We explained to the court, International Court of Justice, the situation how life was in Chagos, how our lives have been changed into a nightmare, and who are our wishes. We want to return back to our homeland, like everyone who has the right to live on his birthplace. And we just alert worldwide. First of all, in 2017, we have a United Nations General Assembly, have a vote where Mauritius got 96 against 15 to UK. And after that, the matter been referred, as I said, and on a total of 14 judges in the International Court of Justice, 13 was against the occupation of UK on the Chagos archipelago and recognize the dignity and the sovereignty of Chagos should be taken over by Mauritius. But let me tell you, what happened? We still, the difference between brothers of Palestine and Chagossian, that means that Palestinians, even they are facing with many difficulties with the Israel government occupation, they are on their birthplace, whereas we still on a foreign place. We do not have access to our country. But even that, we still continue to say that with all the decision of the ICJ, with the decision of a United Nations resolution, the UK still occupying illegally Chagos archipelago and prevent Chagossian to return to live on Chagos. But we, as I said, we will never give up because we think that we are right and no one can prevent us to return. We are preparing ourselves, but as you know, the world are facing with COVID-19. Time will come where we prepare ourselves with all the media, with all supporting people to allow our people to return back to Chagos archipelago because it's our place of birth, and no one can deny what I put on your birth certificate to say clearly your place of birth, the day and the month, the year you were born. And we can't understand how the UK government is just making something difficult for the Chagossian community to return to Chagos archipelago. And it's a pleasure for me today to participate in this webinar. I had to let you know that our group, the Chagos Refugee Group, form part of all the NGOs forming part in Mauritius who supporting our brothers and sisters of Palestine. And we will always be at your side. And one thing I would like to share with you, never give up. One day will be time for Palestinians to take the future in their hand as Chagossian. We are all brothers in struggle. Thank you. for your attention.
Thank you very much, Olivier. Very interesting story. But again, British colonialism is responsible for the suffering of so many people, also in the Indian Ocean, and not many people know about that. But they went through the legal way, United Nations, the ICJ. Now I want to get a comment from Saul. Do you think that Palestinians will be able to get their rights back through this legal process and the international institutions such as United Nations or ICJ, based on your knowledge about international human rights institutions? Go ahead, Saul.
Great, thank you. Oh, sorry. Yes, great, thank you, and thanks very much for this opportunity to participate in very, very stimulating discussions. It's easy to get very cynical, of course, about international institutions, about the UN, about international law in general. I was a UN guy for a long time, and of course I know that there are grave limitations, and it's difficult. It's never perfect. It's difficult to push them in the right direction. The rich and powerful will, in many ways, dictate the agenda of the United Nations, of these international institutions. That's the world we live in. And so it's easy to get very cynical. In answer to your question, Nazari, I do think that there are a lot of possibilities for Palestine to get justice through these international institutions, but it's going to require a lot of work also from us in pushing governments and those institutions into doing the necessary. With Palestine, I mean, the so-called international community, meaning the small group of political elite from a very small number of rich and powerful countries, from the get-go, they have completely failed the Palestinian people. I mean, that's clear to anybody with half a brain. In 47, when the Brits just sort of like threw the Palestine issue into the face of the relatively new United Nations and said, look, I don't know what we're going to do, come up with a solution. And so, you have a situation in 47, the Zionist settlers owned about 3% of Palestinian land. It was about 1/3 or so of the population. And so the UN's great idea was, okay, why don't you guys split the country in two? And, the Palestinians could just like give up half of their country to these guys coming from Europe who own 3% of the land. Yeah, sounds like a great idea. So, from the get-go, really, the UN has failed to protect the Palestinian people's rights and, to do the cause of justice. And, even now, we're still, we being, the international community, the governments, are still talking about the two-state paradigm. This is where this started. The partition resolution, I mean, it started before that, but in sort of very official terms in the UN, this is where it started. The partition resolution was the one that established as an international goal the two-state solution, whereby the Palestinians would just happily give up, half of their country to these Zionist settlers from Europe, and everything would be just fine. Now, of course, this was a recipe for disaster, and here we are. But still, to this day, the powerful governments, including mine, the Japanese, still talking about two states living side by side in peace and harmony. Yeah, Israeli colonies have completely colonized, wide swaths of land of the West Bank. But yeah, it'll work out. It's like this broken record. I'm old enough to remember records, actually, and it's like this broken record that just keeps on playing over and over and over, even though the paradigm has completely been a complete failure, and even though it hasn't worked up till now. Where we are now is much worse than where we are, where we were 20 years ago, from the perspective of the Palestinian people, and it's just getting worse and worse. And that's why I think this whole apartheid paradigm that is finally beginning to get the attention that it has always deserved, it is an important one. Now, Manal will, of course, confirm, reaffirm that Palestinians have been talking about Israeli apartheid for decades, probably, or for as long as you can remember. So, it's a little bit strange to me that all of a sudden, B'Tselem comes out with a report and Human Rights Watch comes out with a report, and oh my God, we're so impressed. Oh my God, Israeli apartheid. Palestinians have been talking about this forever. But it's still a positive thing. It's a positive thing that at least now, the discourse is shifting, and it's shifted, I think, in a very, very irrevocable way, definitely to, stress this issue of apartheid. And the important thing about this paradigm, Manal had been saying this, the important thing about looking at this whole thing as apartheid is that it's not just about 67. 67 is apartheid. I mean, you got to be insane not to look at this as apartheid. It is apartheid. It's clear as the light of day. But it's not just 67. We have to look at the plight of refugees who have been, refused their internationally recognized right to return. The right to return is an international human rights law. It has been in countless, resolutions of the UN. It has been, it has been reaffirmed over and over and over. And yet, Israel still manages to flout international law and do it. But, so we have to look at that as well. You have this population of refugees, millions of people who were ethnically cleansed from their homeland and are still refused their right to return. The Nakba continues. The Nakba never ended. I mean, it is still continuing. We have to look at the situation of 48 Palestinians who were, Palestinians who have Israeli citizenship, and yet they face all sorts of levels of discrimination throughout Israeli society. Just as one, indicative example, they can't own land. They're basically barred from owning houses or owning land in the state, in what is now the state of Israel. So, you look at all of this in the entirety. Obviously, East Jerusalemite, absolutely no question. You have these people who have been living in their lands, their houses for generations and generations, far before any of these Zionists came from Europe, and all of a sudden they are treated legally as foreigners. I'm serious. I mean, if, for example, if a European went to Israel, an Israeli university, and he or she would get a visa, he does the university course, he leaves, and that's it. He loses his visa. That's how it goes. He's a foreigner. He doesn't want to stay. He goes. So, that's how East Jerusalemites are treated under the occupation Israeli law. So basically, they are treated as if they are, foreign tourists, foreign visitors, foreign residents in their own land. So, we have to look. The important thing about using this apartheid paradigm is that we look and see all of these issues, all of Palestine, not just 67, but all of Palestine, and to see how the Israeli rule over all of these people is an apartheid system. And it is. I mean, there's no question about it. A lot of people still think that apartheid is something that was completely unique to South Africa. They think, oh yeah, apartheid, yeah, but South Africa abandoned that in the 90s. And so, apartheid's over. I mean, it doesn't exist anymore. Well, no, there is an international human rights convention, which is, which prohibits apartheid. It is called, the Convention Against Apartheid. That's a shortened name, but, the Convention Against Apartheid. And in the text, it says, it defines apartheid in numerous ways and says, and uses the example of South Africa merely as an indicative example, blah, 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 such as what is going on in South Africa. That's essentially what it says. So it is recognized, apartheid is recognized as a universal phenomenon, something that all of the international community must prohibit, must be against, and, must do their utmost to overturn, should it ever happen. And it's also in the statute, the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. And this is where, we get to another recent development that is so important. The International Criminal Court has finally, after years of sort of going back and forth, and a lot of us in the human rights community were very concerned, but they have finally announced that, yes, They are going to look at the situation in Palestine. Yes, they are going to, they are doing a serious investigation into potential war crimes and crimes against humanity. And that is extremely important because, the situation in Palestine, I mean, every single human right, every single internationally recognized human right is violated on a systemic basis, right? And at the core of these is the question of impunity, Israeli impunity for these crimes, right? So we're talking about impunity as a state, the state of Israel, continuing to receive international support from the Americans, the Europeans, the Japanese, all these kind of countries, and continuing to provide political cover, giving them weapons, jointly developing technologies, all this kind of stuff. So impunity as a country, not being sanctioned for the violations that they're doing, but also impunity on the individual level, right? So you have, down up from the highest level of political authority, military command, down to the youngest Israeli conscript that pulls the trigger and violates the rights of Palestinian people. All of these people up till now, they have basically got off scot-free. And with what is happening in the International Criminal Court, inshallah, we hope that that situation will come to an end. We hope, inshallah. I have a little bit of a beef with the ICC because the ICC is also based on the two-state paradigm. It is also looking at what is happening in 67, and that is something that I feel is insufficient. It's not good enough. But let's face it, it is a positive step because it can bring some semblance of justice to what is going on. I'm looking at, in particular, the ICC has also mentioned in particular the question of the settlements, the colonization. Again, it's 67, but it is the colonization of Palestinian land. And, this is something that there is just no way the Israelis can talk their way out of. I mean, there's just no way. You have, Israeli IDF soldier shoots a Palestinian, shoots him in a protest or, kills him in cold blood or whatever. And there are always a million ways for a big, well-resourced military to get out of this. Oh, we don't, the video, oh, we don't have the video, we threw it away. Oh, we're going to do an investigation. Investigation, give me a break. But, there are ways of, sneaking out of it. We hope that, the ICC will not be fooled by these ways. But, the point is that there are ways of getting out of it. But with the colonization, there's no way. Every single Israeli government since, 67, not to mention 48, has actively, openly, promoted and pushed forward the colonization of Palestine. Every single Israeli government, there's no hiding this. It's completely open. And this is obviously going to, there's no way they can get out of this, what is clearly a war crime. So, inshallah, we do hope that this is going to bring some semblance of justice. And don't, I'm saying to, all the people out there listening, don't think that, yes, there is, the ICC is not perfect, and it's easy, again, to get skeptical about international institutions. I come back to what I said at the beginning. But don't think the Israelis are not afraid of this. I guarantee you they are afraid of this. I guarantee you Netanyahu, people in his cabinet, generals, they wake up in the middle of the night screaming and sweating, worrying about this. They do. Every, high-ranking IDF officers, when they travel abroad, they have a special, function on their phones in case they are arrested for war crimes. There's a special IDF unit of lawyers that is supposed, they're ready to be sent off to any country in case, one of their comrades is arrested for and accused on war crimes, right? This is something, they are afraid of. They're not dumb. They know that they're doing bad things. Deep down, they understand this. And what all of these guys, and I'm not, Israel and all the countries that have done bad things, all the people that have done bad things, what they are afraid of more than anything is being held accountable for their crimes. And, that's why part of human rights is this element is part of human rights. It's part and parcel. It is a pillar of human rights, holding the bad guys to account, holding them accountable for their crimes. And so that's why, all of the human rights community is definitely looking at this with great interest and with the strongest of hopes that the ICC will do the necessary. And we will see these war criminals being brought to justice. So inshallah, let's hope, and maybe I'll finish there.
Thank you very much, Saul, for your comments. Very interesting, and that gives hope for all of us here watching the situation in Palestine. Now I want to pose a question to Dr. Saad. Many Malaysian Arabs, I suppose people all over the world, they are witnessing the Palestinians now fighting for justice over there with whatever they have, but they seem to be alone, right? They are shooting rockets from Gaza. They are throwing stones from in West Bank, but that's it they can do. But nobody seems to be helping them. So people are wondering why are the Arab countries not helping their fellow Arab Palestinians to fight for their freedom? Maybe Dr. Saad can explain why the situation is like that at the moment. Thank you. Go ahead.
Well, let me start by saying it's a fallacy to think that the Arab countries are one homogeneous group that talks with one language toward one interest. And it's also a fallacy to think that Israel, as Israel thought for a long time, that the Palestinian people are not separate and have their own identity as people, but they are just a bunch of Arabs who are living on this land temporarily. So to put things back into perspective, no peace will occur until Palestinian rights are restored. No matter how many Arab countries sign treaty with Israel, it will not make peace in the final analysis. But let's take the current situation and try to analyze what happened since what's so-called the Abraham Accord and the deal of the century. Part of the mythology that exists in the right-wing Israeli and the Zionists, that if you can separate the Arab countries and hold peace with each one of them, that the Palestinian case will disappear and there will be no more courts. The fact is that with all the pressure that the Trump association put, they could find only 4 countries to sign. One was Morocco to get support of the US on the Western Sahara. One was Sudan to be lifted from the sanction and get credit. And the 2 Gulf countries, Bahrain and the UAE, because they thought the US is the only protection for them from what they perceive as the Iranian threat. Of course, all of these deals are just like the real estate deal that Trump and Kushner are accustomed to do. Hype, not based on truth. But the common issue that attach all these, that it is between governments of these countries and not the people of these countries. And that's why I'm saying the people, the Arab people, are one Arab people living in the 20 Arab states. But each one of these Arab people have its own dignity, their own character. But what common to them is they all believe in the rights for each one of them to live free within the boundaries that their ancestors have lived in. The degree of freedom that my country enjoy, at least internally, Kuwait, had led to this aspect of solidarity continue from the time before 1948 till today. Kuwaitis have always supported the right of Palestinian people for self-determination. And multitude of NGOs have organized and continue to organize and take active part. The government of Kuwait have steadfastly held to that. Parliament of Kuwait have never wavered in the support of Palestine, even after the PLO supported the invasion of Kuwait. So therefore, that vision that if few countries sign up, that the support to Palestinian people will disappear is not true. It's a fallacy. It's a fallacy that, in a way, self-defeating. If the Israelis believe, as Netanyahu did, that just by signing this so-called Abraham Accord, he has won his case, he's sadly awakened today by everybody standing in support of Palestinian people, including some of those governments that he signed the accord with. In Kuwait, we have not stopped. Beside all the Red Crescent drive to help our brethren in Jerusalem and Gaza, there have been marches. There is one march today. An unbelievable amount of social media transfer of information, and the struggle will continue. And one has to think back to the 60s, when it looked hopeless that South Africa will ever be able to overthrow the apartheid regime there. Just think, it's only 30 years ago that everybody thought it was given up. Given up, it's forever. I don't want to take much of the time because I want to open for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saad, for your comment. I have a couple of questions to our panelists from the viewers. Number one is, maybe this is for Saul to think about it, because the question pertains to what can Britain do beyond accepting our responsibility and care for Palestine. This question probably came from a British. You are not the spokesman of the British government, but you may want to express your opinion on what Britain can do. Another question I would want to give you to address it to Manal. And Saul can also address it too if you want to. How can ordinary people push demands in the corridors of international bodies like the UN, especially with most governments capitulating? Okay, so the question on the Britain just now, Olivier can also talk about it, because you have experience dealing with the British government to get the rights for the Chagossian people. So Olivier can probably talk about that as well. Yeah, specifically for Manal, can you comment on the situation in historic Palestine, where we are seeing Jewish mobs or Zionist mobs going after Palestinians, hurting them and going to their houses? From what I could see in some videos, they are breaking into Palestinian houses and attacking them. So what is going to happen in the future over there? If this continues, what will be the final outcome of what's going to happen over there? What can you see in terms of the scenario? Okay, can Manal start first, please?
Yeah, sure. Commenting on these mobs held by settlers, specifically in East Jerusalem and in 48 Palestine, and even in the West Bank, like we've seen fanatic settlers attacking Palestinians attacking Palestinian communities in the areas surrounded by illegal settlements. What I want to emphasize here is that the violence of Israeli settlers is part of the layers of oppression that we Palestinians are subject to. It's part of the systematic violence Israel is practicing against us. And everything the settlers do is coordinated with the Israeli military. It's actually under the protection of Israeli military. About like hundreds of thousands of settlers live now in illegal settlements in the West Bank. All of them are trained how to use weapons against Palestinians. So we expect them to just keep, if things escalate more, we Palestinians are afraid of them coming to our villages and towns and starting shooting us at us. This happened before. And we've seen also in Jerusalem at the beginning of Ramadan, they took to the streets chanting death to Arabs. That was organized, that was coordinated with the Israeli government, and was part of the plans to tighten the grip over Jerusalem, as I said. And in 48 Palestine, people there keep talking about the violence of settlers. But at the same time, what I see is that the Palestinians also are countering this in a really creative and interesting way. For instance, they started forming popular committees, and these committees are in charge of protecting every single town. Like in every single town or city, there are committees to protect people. There are committees even to make sure that people, when they want to go, for instance, to buy food from the supermarket, they go there in groups. There are, yesterday, they wanted to arrest a Palestinian in the town of Kufr Kanna in 48 Palestine. And all of the people, they just went there to protect him. They got injured, 50 of them, but they insisted on protecting that member of their community. And this is what Palestinians in other areas are doing. So yeah, the settlers violence, which is part of the state violence, and it is supported and protected by the state violence, is being countered by Palestinians. It is dangerous, and it is alarming for international parties to intervene and protect Palestinians, especially in 48 Palestine. But we resist. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manal, for your comment. Yeah, it's been going on for many decades already anyway, right? So it's just getting worse at the moment. Now, regarding the British government, maybe Olivier and Saul can say something about that. And after that, I want Dr. Saad to also comment on people seem to have a feeling that the Arab leaders are not actually representing the views of their own people, some of the Arab governments, and therefore the world is being misled, thinking that the Arabs don't care about Palestine. Actually, they do. But the leaders, and they have their own agenda. So later on, maybe Dr. Saad can talk about that as well. So Olivier, you want to say something about the British government?
First of all, I think that I just take the example of Chagossian issue, Chagossian struggle. It was unknown for British people, first of all. What we have to do, we have to make a awareness campaign to explain people. And we involve many people, public figures, like member of parliament, just approaching them, explain them. The most important, to explain them where are the difficulties people face. And we even get Peace Nobel Prize. You know, it's not something that unknown to people now nowadays, because in our days we have more advantage. Like we have social media, who can just take any matter at any time. It was not the case in the past. But I think that we need to make more focus on the issue, so to alert worldwide opinion. And of course, we have been very advantageous by media coverage, because without media coverage, everything would be very difficult for us. But what we have been able to do, we just, it was not easy for me to every 5 minutes to give interview to newspaper, to radio, television. And it was a pleasure for me because I want to spread out the message, the difficulties, the suffering of my people. I think that our brothers and sisters also need to do that way. Same with all the support of the world, we need to let people know that there is something wrong. There is a decision taken by United Nations who says that the Palestinian people need to have the right to live on this birthplace. Why Israel is prohibiting that? We have to say, we have to give awareness. I think that the most important just a sensibilization campaign to explain people that we need to focus, and it is by that we will become very famous and many people will know.
Thank you, Olivier. It's just that we also have to realize that at the moment, Britain has not even accepted responsibility of what has happened over there, right? The British government see the Balfour Declaration as something which they don't feel guilty about. They celebrate it. They praise the action of the Lord Balfour to write the letter to grant the land of Palestine to the Zionists. So I think it's a long way to go as far as Palestine is concerned with the British government, and therefore probably there need to be more efforts over there in Britain. Saul.
Sorry to disturb. I forgot something. I just want to tell something to all my brothers and sisters. Be always united, because as you know, superpower, like the UK government tried to do, they want to divide and rule. They want to make division among our community. You see, don't let them divide. We should all unite in our action.
All right, thank you. So, Saul, what can ordinary people do to get United Nations to do something regarding Israel?
Yes, no, thank you. Olivier's statement was a pretty tough act to follow, but I think I want to second what he said, and I certainly want to concur. And I think there are ways of doing this. I mean, you get involved in an NGO like Amnesty International, and they do international lobbying and that kind of thing. I mean, there are ways of doing this, but really, what we can all do as citizens of our respective countries is go out and protest, make our views known, go out on the streets and demonstrate, write letters to government officials and to politicians. And, again, like with international institutions, it is easy to get cynical about this, to think, it's just not going to make a difference, and, all this kind of thing. But, I worked for Amnesty International for a long time, and also, I have seen with my own eyes how governments work, and they are afraid. I mean, that's the only way I can put it. They look very powerful. They're rich and powerful, and they're guarded by walls and people with guns and all this kind of thing. But in many ways they dictate the agenda of the media and all this kind of thing. Yes, they have a lot of leverage they can pull, and they are powerful in some ways, but they are afraid. They are afraid of people coming out in the streets and saying, we're not happy with this. I'm not saying, be violent. I'm saying, engage in these kind of protests and showing the government, the governments what we demand as the citizenry of the world. That really does have an effect. And, instead of sort of trying to go directly to the UN it's made up of the member states, and its agenda is dictated by these kind of powerful countries, including the UK. The UK, is pretty much a second-rate power, if not a third-rate power now. But it by mere virtue of the fact that it was on the winning side in 1945, it still has a seat on the UN Security Council. It has veto rights, and it has, it wields immense power over what what the organization should and shouldn't do and can't talk about. So it's really important that we, put pressure on our governments to, to further the cause of justice for Palestine and, like Olivier said, for, all of the oppressed people all over the world. And it's the same thing with the ICC. I just want to add, the ICC it's a court. It's an independent institution, and it jealously guards its independence, and that's important. It's great. But, we should not fool ourselves into thinking that it is immune to pressure. It is, it does feel pressure. The Americans are not state party to the ICC, ha ha ha. So, there are fewer levers that they can pull, but the United States is a very rich and powerful country, and it can put pressure on the court in many different ways. So, it's important that we also, demand that our governments make sure the ICC does not buckle to this kind of pressure. Make sure that the ICC, does do the necessary and further the cause of justice. Thanks.
Thank you, Saul. Can I get some response from Dr. Saad to the question about the Arab people in general and as opposed to their leaders?
No, I will respond to both. I will respond first to the question that everybody was talking about. And I gave the example of South Africa for a very good reason. We must believe that the change has to come by strengthening the grassroots movement around the world in a way to affect the governments, the companies, the diversion. That's why I believe BDS is one of the best movements that occurred. The way to change the reality is to make it expensive to maintain this reality. Now, expensive can be take many ways. Can take a form of a demonstration, a boycott, making sure that shareholder of large corporation stand up against the practices. Look what happened in Atlanta recently in the US. There are many examples of but it is multifaceted, multi-effort that we all have to practice on. Unfortunately, in the past, we have been led to believe that the leaders are everything. But the leaders are not, unless they can lead. That means they have a vision to their people, and they translate the interest, the national interest of these people into a movement that can achieve that. Most Arab countries, because of underdevelopment, have been straddled with mediocre people who their only effort is to maintain their status quo and their privileges. And that is what colonial power have always played on. This is how they occupied most of the world, by catering to these type of people. But this have changed. It's no longer workable. And little by little is being eroded. So again, I go back. The struggle is long. In this case, it lies with the people. The Palestinian people are the vanguard now of liberation movement all over the world. Our duty is to help them. Help them by organizing, by support, by helping the internal front in Palestine become strong economically, politically, in every way possible. Our struggle is just started, and it doesn't make a difference when it ends. It will end when justice is achieved.
Thank you, Dr. Saad. Very inspiring words there. And I want to give the last words to Manal. How can, many people watching now, how can more people encourage and support BDS? What's your advice to all the viewers in terms of activism and also support for BDS? Go ahead, Manal.
Thank you. I think there are many different ways to support the BDS at the moment. People can, starting from boycotting Israeli products, refusing to buy Israeli products, and raise awareness among people I mean, those who do that raise awareness among people of the importance of boycotting Israeli products. They can also pressure at the institutional level. I mean, they can pressure institutions to divest from Israeli and multinational companies that invest in Israeli apartheid. Israeli companies like Elbit Systems, the biggest Israeli company for producing weapons that are tested on Palestinians in Gaza, as what is happening right now. International or multinational companies like HP, Cemex, and many other companies that Pillsbury and other companies that invest in Israeli apartheid and even have business in Israeli settlements. People can also join a BDS campaign within their community or any other solidarity groups with Palestine and do actions collectively by pressuring their local churches, their cultural centers, and other institutions in their communities not to deal with apartheid Israel and to declare their areas and their institution apartheid-free zones. I don't know. I'm mindful of time. I don't know if we have time. I just saw a question in the chat about Palestinians who get arrested and the spread of drugs among Palestinian communities. We don't have time, right?
We can say a few words. You can say a few words about. You can get a brief comment about that. Please go ahead.
Okay. Regarding the arrest, just quickly, regarding the arrest of Palestinians in Jerusalem, Palestinian children, many of them, of those arrested, are below the age of 16 years. There are different charges, sometimes throwing stones, sometimes protesting even without throwing stones. In other times, if the Israeli occupation forces raid a certain neighborhood or village, others try to stop them, and by stopping them, they get arrested by the Israeli occupation forces. Yeah, so. Okay. Thank you very much for giving me the time.
All right, thank you very much to all our panelists. We have actually run out of time already. But we have certainly learned a lot of things from many people. Certainly, I learned a lot also from the struggle of not only the Palestinian people. Of course, we are following that closely, but also the struggles of the Chagos people against colonialism, and also, most importantly, is the importance of the people. This is stressed by all the panelists, even Dr. Saad said just now. We have to work together, the international community, the ordinary people, to pressure our leaders. The leaders cannot act on their own. They actually will have to ultimately be responsive to the will of the people. So the people have got to work harder, and we can work through the BDS movement because this is proving to be the most effective channel or the most effective way to put pressure on Israel, and there are many branches of BDS movement that we can affiliate ourselves with to get involved in BDS activities. We have, as I said, we have run out of time. I thank again our panelists for your contribution, and also I would like to thank the viewers and the listeners and the people who post questions to make this afternoon a very, very meaningful